Welcome to this week's episode of the Freedom from Religion Foundation's weekly Ask an Atheist. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
And I am Andrew Seidel, FFRF's Director of Strategic Response. As always, if you have questions today, leave them in the comments right here on Facebook, or you can email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org. That's askanatheist@ffrf.org.
Today, we are going to be art critics. We are going to talk about a sinister and absurd painting that debuted 2 weeks ago, to our great ridicule and disbelief, by Jon McNaughton, and it's called Legacy and Hope.
And we've known at FFRF for quite a while that symbols are powerful. This is why theocrats and Christian nationalists want God in the Pledge of Allegiance. And as our national motto, it's why the Ten Commandments monuments, nativity scenes, and the shrines to Jesus go up on government property. It's why they want to put Bibles in every single hotel room. This is a way of marking their territory, but it's also a way of staking a claim on the American identity. And that's why FFRF spends time and resources challenging those symbols.
Yes, symbols are indeed powerful, Andrew, and that is why I asked for a takedown of this grotesque painting. And Andrew, you kindly obliged, and you wrote a very masterful piece. I think it's FFRF's first art criticism essay. And in that blog, you wrote that Mormon painter Jon McNaughton refers to himself as America's artist, but that he's actually the Thomas Kincaid of Christian nationalism. And that became the title of your blog. You wrote, while no critic could consider it masterful, it is a masterpiece of Christian nationalism. Legacy of Hope features an absurdly eclectic cast of characters, including adversaries, including Harriet Tubman, Andrew Breitbart, Frederick Douglass, Robert E. Lee, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Martin Luther King Jr., and others, all united in prayer around Donald Trump in the Oval Office. What's wrong with this picture, Andrew?
I mean, there's so much that's wrong with it. It really is unbelievable. And like most of our viewers, when you asked me to do this, I didn't know Jon McNaughton's name, though I had actually seen some of his other ultra-nationalist yet distinctly un-American paintings. And Bruce, we're going to roll through some of them so you can see and get a feel for the type of work that McNaughton produces. And I wanted to give him a fair shake. I felt that was important for any piece that was going to be critical of art. And to do that, I really had to immerse myself in his work. And it was truly awful. It was like living in this quagmire of fetid syrup, sickly, cloying, saccharine, and sycophantic all at the same time. It was really, it was one of the hardest things I've had to do at FFRF.
So you can see some of the work that Andrew had to suffer through, including two really ridiculous paintings. One is entitled Separation of Church and State. And one is One Nation Under God. So McNaughton is clearly a Christian nationalist, hence the title that you chose for this essay.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think it's really easy to mock McNaughton for this uncoordinated and rambling compositions, especially the one that we're going to talk about today. You know, it looks like something that was disgorged from the viscera of Ann Coulter or Robert Jeffress, and we're probably going to mock it more on this show. But the message is actually very clear to his audience. McNaughton's acolytes are not going to look or see, they're going to simply feel. They'll ignore the absurdities and the mashed and macerated history, and they're going to focus on the feeling in their gut. So for them, every brushstroke is a confirmation that Christianity is the beating heart of the American identity. So this is propaganda, nothing more. McNaughton is telling every Christian nationalist that they are the true heirs of the American experiment. So the painting doesn't portray the American spirit or our founding ethos or our aspirations. It captures an existential threat to our republic. We are in a fight for America, for the American identity, and for what it means to be an American. And I think most people don't even realize it, but FFRF is really on the front lines fighting this menace.
Yes, and that's why we're spending time on this issue, and it is part of our larger fight. And I would have to say also, Andrew, that this is very typical of Mormon quote-unquote artwork, which when you look at the European masters who so often did biblical images or allegories. There was a lot of great art. But when you look at Mormon art, it is really poor. It is all propagandistic. So let's talk about the legacy of hope. And McNaughton doesn't just paint. He publishes these little stories along with his paintings and explanations and videos that accompany some of his more controversial works. And Legacy of Hope, he claims, was inspired by this White House photograph of an event that took place in February. So there it is, yeah. And that was one of many prayerful meetings that Trump had. Do you remember what was going on here, Andrew?
Yeah, this was a meeting with African American, with black leaders, and they all laid hands on Trump and prayed for and with him, I guess. And you can see, if we can show them side by side, Bruce, I mean, you can see McNaughton is essentially copying this. I mean, but if you looked at as we're looking at it, the two ladies to the left, the one in the red and black there immediately to the left, are YouTubers, right? All they do is make YouTube videos, and they're replaced with two U.S. presidents, including James Madison, the father of the U.S. Constitution, the father of the Bill of Rights. So that ought to give you a flavor for what McNaughton is trying to do here. I mean, and you mentioned his Mormonism too, and I have to borrow from our friends at How to Heretic, the podcast that's been a big supporter of FFRF. They dubbed McNaughton the Mormon Rockwell, which I thought was too good to pass by.
Yeah, except boy, Rockwell was sure a much better draftsman and painter. So that's kind of insulting.
Well, let's talk about that before we get into the specifics of who's in this painting. We should address McNaughton's technique. And Annie Laurie, you are something of an artist. I know you don't want to talk about it too much, but I've got your portrait of Bertrand Russell on my office wall at Free Thought Hall. So can you tell us just a little bit about artists and hands and rendering hands and how that's a measure of skill, maybe?
Yeah, well, I think it is. And when you look at the hands, are we going to see a close-up? I think, Andrew, you pointed out that if you count those hands, there's only 9. I think one of them is supposed to be under. It's very crude work, and there's also such a lack of proportion in the painting. For example, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the hands are too big rendered here, and then some of the fingers, to me, they look disembodied, but they also look like they're attached to both hands in some cases.
Yeah, it's crude. And another thing, I don't know if we can see the whole, you wanted to show close-up of the hands in the Bible and the Constitution next, so you can see trying to tie the two things together. Go ahead.
No, please.
No, I want you to talk about that because I was going to go on to something different that's wrong.
Well, I wanted to say that to me, this was a perfect example, and really, it really does a good job of exemplifying why this is Christian nationalist. Even if you didn't look at all the figures and couldn't understand what McNaughton was getting at because he's not that great at rendering likenesses, putting the Bible right next to the Constitution on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office, I mean, that is about as explicitly Christian nationalist as you could get in a painting, I think. So he's not being subtle here.
No, there's nothing subtle. Before, I know we're going to talk about one of the things that I tasked you with, and it was wonderful that you jumped to this right away and came up with what I think is an incredibly funny blog. If you haven't read it, you need to go and read Andrew's blog. But it was hard to figure out who people were, and you did a really good job at that. But before we talk about who the individuals are, can we see the painting again, Bruce? And I was going to show you something else that's really wrong with the perspective. Like in the back, one of those, the guy who's second in the back is Thomas Jefferson, who was over 6'2". And then you see how he's being dwarfed by Reagan, who I believe was 6'1". His artistic rendering, everything about it is just so contrived and poorly wrought. But I think we should go on and sort of talk about who each of these individuals are. And you did this great research and supposition, Andrew. So should we go from the left?
Yeah, I think let's go from the left to right. So we start with, believe it or not, Andrew Breitbart. That's Andrew Breitbart on the far left. You probably recognize that name. Not a historical figure, but a favorite of Jon McNaughton's. He has that notorious website that is really a hotbed
excuse me,
of
I don't
Christian
know if it's just me,
nationalism
but
and
I'm
one
not
of its
hearing
most devout
anything.
enablers. And I think this is probably a pretty good indicator of where McNaughton gets his worldview. This is James Madison, the father of the Constitution, the father of the Bill of Rights. And I mean, to me, it was hard to tell. And Bruce, if you can put up there was an image, some of McNaughton's other paintings, his more incendiary paintings, he actually includes a key to help the viewer identify who is who. So this is, I believe this is from the painting In God We Trust. So he helpfully identifies number one is Jesus Christ. Then he has the Tree of Life identity. So he's identifying all the symbolism. And so this is one of the things that I had to do to identify all these various characters, the 18 characters in this particular work, was go through and look at these other paintings and compare to the keys and figure out who was who. And I'm pretty sure that this is James Madison. Who would not be pleased with the mixture of state and church that is portrayed in this picture. It is, he was one of the primary defenders, essentially invented the separation of state and church for America. And the idea that he would be praying with Trump in the Oval Office and would want that captured and then broadcast far and wide is complete and utter nonsense. It shows a complete lack of understanding of American history. And that right there is Jon McNaughton himself. This is a self-portrait. I mean, Annie Laurie, I don't know if you click. There's a link in the original article. Bruce, if you can put up the actual photo of Jon McNaughton and see how, so we can compare and contrast how he rendered himself. There he is in real life. That's a photo which actually captures the man. And if we can go back and compare that to his, I guess we could say, deluded idea of himself. The delusion extends fairly deep and fairly wide for this artist.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, but he's sticking himself in with the founding fathers, like he's equivalent.
This one is Thomas Jefferson. And again, you already mentioned the height disparity, which is really interesting. I mean, Jefferson, and I think a lot of people probably don't know, there's always this the myth of Washington being super tall. And he was. I mean, he was, I believe he's the fifth tallest president after Lincoln and LBJ, and now Trump and then Jefferson. And there's a bunch of other presidents who were also as tall as Washington. But, Washington was not a prayerful man, certainly never prayed in public, did not ever use religion in a way to garner political favor. And one of my favorite quotes comes from a letter, and I think Bruce has an image. Happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effectual support. The government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction. I mean, this is a really great clarion call for the separation of state and church, and it's really hard not to look at this painting and see McNaughton having the government of the United States give to bigotry a pretty large sanction, if for no other reason than including several racists in the Oval Office. Anyway, I'm sure we'll get to those. So there's a lot of McNaughton's work that relies on George Washington and his piety. But Washington was not publicly pious, and on his website, I found this. That McNaughton actually trots out the trope that Washington added the words "So help me God" when he said the first presidential oath, which is not true. McNaughton talks about George Washington's personal prayer book and in his own handwriting how he wrote these prayers down. We know for a fact that prayer book is a forgery. The Smithsonian has unequivocally identified it as such. So, this is just not a man who is concerned either with artistic technique or historical accuracy.
But of course, there's the great myth of praying during Valley Forge. And there's a famous painting rendered a bit better than McNaughton's painting. And it was even turned into a stamp. You see it everywhere. And it is just disinformation There was no such prayer at Valley Forge, certainly never documented. It's not the kind of thing that Washington would have done. And so there's so much propaganda out there that predates the current rise of Christian nationalism. This has been something that really is a myth that has hounded those of us who work for separation of church and state for several decades, if not half a century. So too bad to see all of that disinformation, because images are so powerful and people see them and think they're true.
Yeah, I mean, that the Washington praying, and especially the praying in the snow at Valley Forge myth, is one of the ones that I hate the most. I mean, because we know where it was invented. It was invented by Parson, religious leader named Mason Locke Weems, who put it in a volume, The Life of Washington. It wasn't until I believe it was the 18th edition, at least, that he added that story, and we know he invented it. There's no historical evidence to suggest it ever happened at all, and it completely goes against Washington's character. We know who invented it and when it was invented, and still it's this widely promoted Christian nationalist myth. So it is frustrating. But let's move on to our next figure. After George Washington, it's JFK. Again, a man who, well, Annie Laurie, I know this is one of your favorite quotes. Why don't you talk about JFK's views on separation of state and church?
Yeah, well, he, of course, famously was the first major Catholic candidate who had a chance, and in 1960 was summoned basically by the Protestant ministers in Houston about his views. They were concerned, would he make his own decisions or would he be directed by the Vatican? And he gave a wonderful speech on the separation of church and state that is the kind of language that we don't hear today from presidential candidates, in which he said, I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, and made many other wonderful utterances of loyalty to our secular constitution.
I mean, again, I don't think this isn't a guy who would probably want to be included in this painting with this message. The next figure, this is one of the ones I'm not sure of. I think this is Calvin Coolidge, based on, I believe I pulled a similar likeness from The Forgotten Man, which is another one of McNaughton's paintings, and identifies Calvin Coolidge. But it's very hard to tell. And so probably not much to say here. I mean, other than his skill at rendering artists or rendering figures is just not that good. And then we have Eisenhower, who presided over a time when so much damage was done to the separation of state and church. So many of the violations of the First Amendment that are still around today took hold during Eisenhower's years in power. Adding under God to the pledge, putting In God We Trust on our paper currency, the National Day of Prayer, the prayer room in the U.S. Capitol. So many of these different things all took hold in the Eisenhower years. He was not really a very religious man before he got into office, but certainly not shy about using the presidency to promote the personal religion he discovered while running for office. Trump himself, of course, with his bizarre folded hands and the American flag pin. And then Martin Luther King, who's in the back and kind of seems like a little bit of an afterthought. Maybe not the best rendering. In the blog or the article that I wrote, I always like to quote his letter from the Birmingham jail, which he wrote to white religious leaders who were standing on the sidelines mouthing sanctimonious trivialities and pious irrelevancies while he was getting down to the business of fighting for civil rights. Go ahead, Amy.
I think I was going to say that when the controversial prayer decisions came down in the early 60s by the Supreme Court, there were two in a row against Bible reading in the schools and also recitation of government prayer. Martin Luther King came out and in favor of those decisions. He believed in the separation of church and state. After
Martin Luther King, we have Frederick Douglass, famous abolitionist. He appears on FFRF's Free Thought of the Day. That famous quote, I prayed, but didn't get freedom till I prayed with my feet," something along those lines.
With my legs.
The one that I love of his is that he said revivals in religion and revivals in slave trade go hand in hand. He was very critical, whatever his personal religious beliefs, he was very critical of religion aligned with political power because of the dastardly role it played in justifying slavery in the Americas, in America. So, I mean, to me, again, including him here is a little, it's a little unbelievable. And next up is Abe Lincoln, actually rendered tall, so I guess that's a plus for McNaughton. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was a big fan of using religious language, but there's a lot of debate about his personal religious beliefs, and whatever they were, he did and was a fan of and defended the separation of state and church, and we included some of that in the article as well. So not sure he would be a huge fan of being portrayed this way either. And then, alarmingly, right behind Lincoln, just to the side, is Robert E. Lee, the man who led the militant armed rebellion against the United States in the name of slavery. And he's standing behind Lincoln, and the last Confederate to stand behind Lincoln in that position assassinated Lincoln. So this is a little bit of an ominous choice. I don't think McNaughton is that subtle or would understand that kind of symbolism. So I doubt that was intentional, but still there. And okay, I could not identify this person. So this is, I don't know who this is. This is an unidentified woman, judging by the clothes, circa probably the 19th century. There are not many female characters in the Bible, and same goes for McNaughton's artwork. There are a few. Dolly Madison has showed up. Abigail Adams has showed up, but I think the fashion is wrong for those two. Clara Barton and Susan B. Anthony are two of his previous subjects, but neither was really a Christian believer, and they could be this figure. But again, it seems that the rendering seems wrong. For instance, Anthony was always portrayed, or she was always photographed with glasses and almost never with a hat. So I don't think this was her, even though a lot of people online have said it was. Annie Laurie, you had some thoughts on who you thought this might be.
Yeah, I thought it might be Willard, the woman who was in charge of the Women's Temperance Union, who was a religious fanatic. So it could be she. She did wear glasses sometimes, but not always pictured with them.
So certainly a possibility. I don't know. There's been debate on this guy. I'm pretty sure that's Billy Graham. I don't really have much doubt about that. Last time Billy Graham was recorded being in the Oval Office, he was on tape with Nixon, slinging his anti-Semitic tropes. So this is a little bit better of a rendering for him, and probably true to McNaughton's oeuvre. Some people said John Wayne, but I'm pretty sure that's Billy Graham. And then Harriet Tubman, who is just an amazing person, and really great historical figure worthy of our remembrance, and artistic renderings, but by artists far better than McNaughton. And you have to remember, too, Trump and his team refused to put her on the $20 bill. So the idea that she'd be in the Oval Office with Trump, or that Trump would want her in the Oval Office praying with him, I mean, this is complete and utter nonsense. And there's, for instance, the Trump campaign was also, the Ronald Reagan Foundation also told the Trump campaign to stop using Ronald Reagan likenesses in any ads that they were running, and you've got Ronald Reagan here. So I guess McNaughton didn't get that memo either. So it's just, there's no sort of reality in this this painting at all, even if they did want to pull various historical figures. I'm not sure that this is John Quincy Adams. I think it is. Excuse me, John Adams, not John Quincy Adams, not his son.
Yeah.
I think it's John Adams, but I'm only basing this really on the bald pate and then the hair at the sides. That's there are other, McNaughton does render Adams other times in his paintings. I don't think It's very similar, but it's the best I could come up with. I thought it was George Whitefield, the preacher, for a while, but the hair is not quite right for that, and that's the one thing that McNaughton seems to be able to get right with these figures. So that's my best guess. And, I mean, again, another president who defended the separation of state and church, signed the Treaty of Tripoli, which says that the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. So not really probably a guy who would be a fan of being here. But let's take the questions, Annie Laurie, and I would definitely want you to weigh in on these. So Danny Travis asks, where did the hand on the Bible in the inauguration thing originate? And I mean, that does go back to the first presidential election. That is not in the Constitution. And the words "so help me God" are not in the Constitution. We do know Washington put his hand on the Bible in the first inauguration, but we also know that he didn't say add the words "so help me God." The presidential oath is laid out in the Constitution itself, and those words are not included. And we know from all the firsthand accounts of the day that Washington did not add them. So Lisa asks, so the painting seems kind of racist and ignores the role Christianity played in American slavery. Do you agree? Yes, Lisa. I certainly do agree. And actually, Lisa, our friends at Black Nonbelievers, which is a group that was founded by Mandisa Thomas, just put up 2 billboards in Atlanta. I think they went up last week. So this is the Black Nonbelievers. These billboards are up in Atlanta. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a story about them. Free yourself from religion and find true liberation. So they are kind of pushing the exact opposite message that McNaughton is trying to push in his painting. And far better symbolism, a little more subtle there if you look at the shadows. Tip of the hat to Mandisa and Black Nonbelievers for coming up with this idea. And it could not come at a better time when you've got these just truly horrific paintings by Jon McNaughton coming out.
I have to say, if you can hear me, Andrew, that while we have dissected what is clearly not a masterpiece, your blog is a masterpiece. It is the best thing that you've written so far, in my opinion, as an article. So entertaining, so funny, and I would encourage everyone to read it. And you can find it at FFRF's website, ffrf.org/news. Look for the drop-down Free Thought Now, which is our blog, or you can find it at the Patheos website, which hosts our blog. And it really is, we need things to laugh about and give us cheer, and there's so much information in it, and you really did a fabulous job.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing that he called the painting "Legacy of Hope" too, and released it in the middle of a pandemic that's killed 150,000 Americans. Victoria Ann asks, "Where's Jesus in this painting?" Jesus did not make it into this particular painting, though he is a popular figure in McNaughton's other meanderings with the canvas. So not in this particular one. There's one. I'm not sure if that's Jesus or an angel, but he does show up in "God We Trust" is one of the ones that he shows up in. There you go. Jesus holding the Constitution. I mean, again, this is as Christian nationalist as you can get. Jesus holding the Constitution and pointing to it as though he wrote it. Just absurd. So Jeremy Clark asked, "Is this thing getting hung in the White House?" No. One of the paintings that McNaughton did, I believe it was The Forgotten Man, was purchased, if memory serves, by Sean Hannity, who claimed to have purchased it so that Trump could put it up in the White House. I don't think that ever happened. So as far as I know, that this fellow's unskilled art is not hanging in the White House, as far as I know. We don't have any more questions, and since Annie Laurie, you and I can't hear each other, I think we're probably best off going ahead and cutting this show off right now. So that is our Ask an Atheist for this week. So thank you for joining us. If you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, please check out our website, ffrf.org. And we will be back next Wednesday with the audio fixed at noon Central Time. with another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. Probably won't be art criticism that time.